I'm making my own way, but I love my baby now. When I love my baby, I'm still learning how. Hey, 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 I'm okay. Stay with me. We'll beat these
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Alicia Connors-Bauer. I am your host this evening for a conversation on challenges facing LGBTIQ youth in Boulder Valley. Joining me this evening are several panelists, starting with Heather Crate. Heather is the program specialist for Boulder County Public Health's OASIS program, a support program for LGBTQ youth. She is also the co-chair of the Boulder Valley Safe Schools Coalition and a member of the St. Vrain Valley Safe Schools Coalition. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you.
Next to Heather is Jean Hodges. Jean is a retired Boulder Valley teacher who directed the theater program at Boulder High School. Since retiring, she's been a co-founder of the Boulder Valley Safe Schools Coalition and as a leader locally, regionally, and nationally with PFLAG, which is Parents, Families, and Friends of Lesbians and Gays. Then we have Michael Clymer. Michael is a sophomore at New Vista High School and president of the Gay Straight Alliance, as well as a member of the Youth Opportunities Advisory Board for the City of Boulder. Next to Michael is Jenny Kay. Jenny is a licensed clinical social worker with a private practice in Boulder. She's currently working with a population of transgender teens and has experience over the last 15 years in working with LGBTQ youth. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So this evening, what I'd like to do is to start us off with just a couple of things that I think might be interesting things to talk about. One of the things that Boulder County does, which I think is unique from other counties in the state of Colorado, is conduct a youth risk behavior survey every 2 years. And as part of that survey, Boulder County asks students about their sexual orientation. So students have the opportunity to indicate whether they're heterosexual, lesbian, gay, or questioning. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, or questioning. And so we have data that talks about certain behaviors that teens engage in. So what I wanted to talk about is one of the things that I found particularly interesting in the statistics is that when you look at the percentage of students who've been harassed on school property, for heterosexual students, 24.5% have been harassed on school property, and twice as many, 51.6% of students who identify as lesbian, gay, or bisexual or questioning have been harassed. So I wonder if we might start out taking a quick look at that and how that impacts kids in school. Heather, would you like to go first?
Sure. Well, I work with LGBTQ identified youth almost on a daily basis, whether that's at our youth group or going into schools, meeting with gay straight alliances. And I do hear from a fair number, mostly around name calling. That's probably the biggest thing, is that being called derogatory names based on their sexual orientation. And oftentimes really just hearing, even in the halls, like, that's so gay, things of that nature, feels harassing, and it feels discriminatory to the youth. So that's a lot of what I hear about is language and language use.
Okay. Anybody else like to add? Jean?
Well, I was thinking that in 1998, when we started the Boulder Valley Safe Schools Coalition, part of my inspiration, in fact, a major part, was knowing that there was a junior in the high school where I taught who quit school because of being so harassed. And I just thought that was outrageous. And then there were other students at the time who were still in school and who said, we really need to do something about this. And that's what began a community effort to try to help the schools do the right thing.
Well, and I think related to that, one of the things we find in the statistics is that for kids who don't go to school because it's unsafe for them, for heterosexual students, that's only 3% of the population. But for LGBTQ students, that's 15.5% who don't go to school because they don't feel safe. So Jenny, is that something that you hear about in your practice?
Quite a bit, and more recently with the transgender population. That population seems to be experiencing a larger degree of discomfort based on questions about, well, are you a boy or are you a girl? What bathroom are you going to use? Will you be, if you have the biology and the sex of a girl, but you're saying you're a boy, are you going to be in my locker room? And are you going to be in the same tent with me when we go camping? Things like that. So it's become so distracting for some of these youth and kids to be in school that they are reporting higher incidence of social anxiety and ability to concentrate, ability to even do their homework at home, because they know that next day when they go to that class that they're doing the homework for, it brings up all of the things that they experience.
So what are some of the things that we can do in schools? And Jean had mentioned GSAs, and so Michael, I know that you're the president of a GSA. Could you tell us a little bit about what that does in school?
Well, I think it just kind of provides a place for people who feel discriminated against or feel like they have no other place to go. It gives them a place to go and just be able to be themselves and not be judged in any way for it. I know that lots of people at New Vista, like we have quite a big population who identify as GLBTQ, but not a lot of them attend our GSA, and because it's because they feel safe at New Vista. Like we were talking about people being harassed on school property, and that really doesn't happen at New Vista all that much. Like it's never happened to me, and I identify as gay, so it's like it's never happened to me. It's never happened to anyone I know, really. Mm-hmm. And so we like to say New Vista is a GSA because we're all just so welcoming and open. But in big schools or in schools where they're not so welcoming or open, I think it can really provide a safe haven for LGBTQ youth. So.
And so I'm curious, given that we see that, the impacts of, being harassed and feeling unsafe at school. Jenny, you talked about how it can really impact academic success. So what are some of the other strategies or some of the other things that you know of that's being done in Boulder Valley schools that can really help support LGBTIQ youth?
Well, I'll go back to the history a little bit, because when we started the Boulder Valley Safe Schools Coalition, the students said to us what they thought was one of the issues was that there were teachers who would hear "that's so gay" or worse in their classrooms or in the hallway, and they would ignore it. They wouldn't even respond to it. And I don't know how true that continues to be, but I think that there was a need for training, which we've been doing for the past 14 years, that we've been working on this. And, you keep having new faculty and new students coming in, so working on school climate is what we've been doing. And we've done it through doing a lot of training and working with the Equity Office when they were doing training too. So it's been a very cooperative effort between the Boulder Valley schools, and we're an advisory group to the superintendent. So it's kind of been working hand in glove, which has been encouraging. And it has changed school climate, so that what I think Michael's talking about is more the norm in many of the schools in Boulder Valley. And I work a lot nationally and have done safe schools trainings around the country, and I can tell you that Boulder Valley is, we're not perfect. We have some work to do, but we're really exemplary for the work that can happen that will help students feel safer.
So one of the things that I was curious about is this idea of when students are being harassed and they're not in a welcome or safe environment, and Jenny, you had mentioned the social anxiety piece, what are some of the things that you maybe say to students, or and Heather, you can answer this too, or other ways that students can find support so that they feel safe if there's not a GSA at their school or if they don't know where to turn?
Yeah. Well, OASIS is a big piece of that. The program stands for Open and Affirming Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity Supports. And we meet on Wednesday nights in Boulder. And it's a really great space for youth. There are some youth who don't, want to maybe go to their Gay Straight Alliance at their school. Maybe they're worried about being out in a more public way. So they can come to the group that's very confidential. That's one way. And yeah, I think there's a lot of really great organizations in the community.
Okay. And Jenny?
So I've noticed with the improvement in teacher education, that is key, I feel like, for acceptance for these kids, because a lot of times teachers were not aware. In my experience, teachers are still struggling with how to handle these climates in their classroom. And so even the language that the teachers are using, or for example, asking teenagers to line up boy girl, things like that, or demonstrate a lack of awareness. So the more awareness teachers have, the more they can also act as a resource. For example, there's an art teacher at a school in Boulder Valley that is very aware of these issues and will help kids to find support groups and counselors, people that they can talk to if they're not ready to be out in a more public way yet.
You know, it's interesting that you talked about teachers, and I know, Jean, you mentioned school climate. I recently had the opportunity to do some focus groups in a school on school climate, to ask students what they thought about their school climate. And one of the things they talked about is that the influence that teachers have and how teachers can help make them feel safe in their schools. But some kids are reluctant to talk to teachers because they're afraid that if they do, the teacher might react to them differently. And so I'm wondering what you think about that idea. Jean?
Well, I think that teachers need to signal in ways that they are safe, and that can happen by what they say in the first day of class, for instance, and what the rules are in their classroom for how people treat each other with respect, and to include the gay, lesbian, bisexual, as well as other minority groups or marginalized groups, the ones who might be more vulnerable, and just to put it out there, and to say there are consequences for that. So I think that's one of the things. Another signal is that a counselor or a teacher should have some kind of sign or symbol that we have. Well, Boulder Valley made some really nifty posters some time ago that was a round circle, and I can't remember the motto now, but they were really attractive, and I hope they're still around. But there were teachers that took those, put those in their room, and when you see a rainbow or, you know, some symbol that says, oh, there's somebody that gets it, you know, that's I think a really important sign for teachers to do.
Okay. And Michael, you talked about New Vista feeling like all of New Vista being a GSA. So there must be something about that climate that makes people feel more safe.
I mean, I think it's that we have such a personal connection with all of our teachers. Like, we're on a first-name basis with all of our teachers, all of our administrators, our principal even. And so I think it just kind of promotes, like, trust between the students and the teachers. And I think the flyers that you're talking about, they have like the pink triangle and it's like safe zone
That's
or
another
something.
one. That's
Okay,
another
so
one,
I've seen
yeah.
those around. And another thing is that counselors, or most counselors, have like a degree of confidentiality where they're not allowed to go say something unless it's unless you're like self-harming or it's like life imminent. There are like certain levels where they're just not allowed to go talk to anyone, parents, other staff members. And so I think kids in high schoolers should really be able to utilize that and be able to go talk to them because there is that degree of confidentiality. So.
Okay. Jenny?
I'm finding a little bit of a different trend because some schools are so accepting, and the teachers are accepting as well, that students that are confused and aren't quite ready to come out because they're just not there in their process yet, that they are almost feeling the pendulum has swung a little bit the other way, that some schools are so safe that they're almost feeling more pressure to come out, or when they're out, to be activists, to do something about it. So I don't know, Michael, what your experience has been with that, but it's something for us to keep in mind because Boulder is so accepting and they do such a good job of that it causes a different level of distress that I think for parents to be aware of that, for teachers and kids also to say it's okay to be your own version of however you want to express yourself.
So you had actually mentioned, Michael, that the GSA at New Vista has a lot of heterosexual members as well?
Last year we didn't, like, at all. We had no straight members, but now this year we actually have, off the top of my head, like 5 or 6 out of our 10 to 15, depending on the day that it is, which is really exciting, because last year we were kind of like deprived of straight people. So this year we definitely have some, and I mean, I think that's amazing because it is a gay straight alliance. It is
Right.
working together. It is being allies to each other, no matter how you identify. And so I think that it is really important for everyone to participate if they feel the need to and if they want to. we don't want to pressure them to participate, and if they want to, then great, they really should. We welcome them, so.
So, in terms of having students participate in a GSA, and you mentioned acting as allies, if other students who are accepting of differences don't participate in something like a GSA, but want to act as an ally, how would they be able to do that? I mean, what advice would any of you give students who don't know what to do, but they want to do something?
I mean, I think the best thing you can do is just be a friend to everyone. And I don't know, you can almost gain notoriety for being an ally, for being a friend to everyone. There isn't really like something that you can just go and be like, hi, I'm Michael. I'm going to be your friend. I'm going to be your ally. You can't really like do that because it's a little awkward. You might scare some people off.
That's right. They think you were weird.
Yes. But I think you can just be friendly and be open and be an ally to everyone that needs an ally.
I think there's another avenue too, besides just the informal being friends, which is really important. I think that one of the things that Jenny was talking about is the questions that get asked of transgender kids or people who are gender variant, however they identify, and just, are you a boy or a girl? What I know in the elementary level is that that's perceived by the child as being harassment.
Yes.
It's teasing somehow. I mean, it's not meant that way. And a lot of times I think the interactions that happen may not be intentionally hurtful, but when you're a sensitive person who's dealing with figuring out who you are, you don't need to feel attacked. And I think that can happen. I think there's the other point I wanted to make was about the work that's happening in many schools about bully proofing. And the bullying program that I'm aware of includes teaching people who are bystanders how to stand up for their friends. And I think learning how to stand up and speak out in appropriate times is really, I think that's how you change the norm. Mm-hmm. And that's what I think school climate is about. And I think teachers can encourage that, but I think students have to be taught. And in fact, maybe teachers have to be taught as well, of how they stop things in their tracks and, if something's happening so that they can address it, as they would a lot of language that they're used to dealing with. They hear the N-word, they know what to do. Mm-hmm. But I think that using language around sexual orientation has been maybe more awkward, I don't know, maybe more difficult for people to address. And I think that's changing, but I think that's still a factor. Yeah.
Heather, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I think another way that students can be involved, even if they don't want to join the Gay Straight Alliance or be a normal part of the group, a lot of schools organize like 1 or 2 yearly sort of school-wide campaigns, whether it's the Day of Silence or Purple T-shirt Day, a way that maybe just for one day you can say, yes, I stand in solidarity with this group. I may not attend every group, but here's my way of stepping up, or even just wearing an ally button on your backpack or something, just some way that you can show that you're an ally as well.
Well, there's the Day of Silence. You've done that, surely?
Yes, I'm not very good at it because I like to talk, but I try.
Discipline.
I try. I like to blurt out in class a lot, which is bad, but I tried. I tried to do like duct tape.
Yeah.
It still didn't work, but I did try, and lots of my GSA tried. It was actually, it fell on a Thursday, which is the day that our GSA meets. So we threw a party, tried to be silent. It didn't work out that well, but we definitely acknowledge it. One thing, it's not necessarily like a problem I have with the Day of Silence, it's that we're not going to get anywhere by remaining silent. And so I know that so that's why I love how Out Boulder did the Night of Noise, which was the night of the Day of Silence.
Yeah.
We broke the silence at 7 o'clock and partied like nothing else. And so I think it's like, yes, we're giving respect to all those who have fought for this cause in the past and that have made a change, but then we're also using our own voices to help further that change.
But I think one of the things that says is that you have never had to be silent.
Exactly, yeah.
And for those who have lived in closets, as my son did when he was in high school, the Day of Silence is highly significant.
Yes, yes.
And I also think that in some schools where they're struggling, this is a way for allies to really align themselves, being part of the Day of Silence and and it's a statement that they can make without having to talk.
Yeah.
And I do believe that there's a value and a power in that act of silence
Yes.
for a day.
Before we go on to other questions, I wanted to do a quick sort of semi sort of commercial break. So we are broadcast live. If anybody who is watching tonight has any questions that they would like to submit electronically, you can go to boulderpsychologicalservices.com and submit your question, and then we will ask it of our panelists. I would also like to let people know that on Thursday, December 20th, later this week, Boulder Psychological Services is sponsoring a workshop on strengthening reading confidence and skills at the Louisville Library from 7 to 8 p.m. And then on Monday, January 14th, right after the holidays, is a session on stress reduction at the Meadows Branch Library, again from 7 to 8 p.m. So we talked a little bit about, I think Michael was the one who mentioned self-harm. And so I wanted to go back and share some information from the Youth Risk Behavior Survey again. And one of the things that I looked up was that percentage of students who indicated self-harm, intentionally self-injured, which is the category. And so for heterosexual students, that's 17%, and for LGBTQ students, it's 61%. One of the other things we asked about are students who felt sad and hopeless, and that's a question of if somebody has felt sad and hopeless for 2 weeks or more during the year prior to the taking the survey. For heterosexual students, that's 22%, and for LGBTQ students, it was 55%. I think the interesting follow-up to that is another question we ask in the survey, which is if you usually get help when you're feeling sad or hopeless. For heterosexual students, that's over 50%, but for LGBTQ students, it's 33%. Which to me says that there's a lot of challenges, and there are challenges going on that impact a student's health, physical health, as well as their mental health, but there's not as many places for them to go. If a student is feeling like they need help, there's not as many places for them to go. So I'm wondering if that's something that you feel exists in this community, that maybe there's not as many places for students to go when they get help, or maybe there is and it's just not as widely known. So I'm wondering what your perception is. Heather?
Yeah. I think part of it is, well, I think a lot of it is fear, just fear of the unknown, fear of walking into a counselor's office or into a support group or into a new space and wondering how they might perceive either your sexual orientation or your gender identity. I think we do have a lot of really great supports. I don't know how much youth are engaging in them or how much, they know about them, because if I'm not out as LGBTQ, I may not go and ask someone, who is a gay-friendly counselor I could go talk to. I know that the interventionists in all of the schools are always LGBTQ friendly and welcoming, and a great place to start. That's usually how I meet a lot of the youth that I work with. But I think a lot of it is that barrier and sort of fear around, am I going to be welcomed when I walk in this door? How am I going to be treated? Is this going to be another situation where someone doesn't understand me or says something that that doesn't make me feel good?
Jean?
Well, I was just reflecting again, thinking about when my son was a student in high school. There was no one to talk to. He was not out. He was one of those people. He wasn't in trouble. I don't think he did high-risk behaviors because he wasn't that kind of kid, but he just sort of became invisible. He did things behind the scenes when I was working in the theater, that sort of thing. And when I asked him, when he eventually came out to us, and I asked him, well, didn't you have questions? I mean, where did you go? Who did you turn to? I said, did you try to talk to any of the counselors? And he said, oh, Mom. Now, this is the 80s, right? You hope things have changed. But he said, there's nobody that I would talk to. You could talk to them about college. You couldn't talk to them about personal things. And I think there is also a degree of internalized homophobia that a lot of young people, when they're still trying to figure out who they are and and they don't want to get labeled, for one thing, and they're so afraid, as Heather has already said, that somebody will find out or that it'll come down hard on them. And of course, the hardest people to talk to directly would be their parents in most cases. And so that's another piece of it that I think makes it difficult, because it spills over into the family dynamics. And some parents are better prepared for that conversation than others. And that's the work that PFLAG does.
Okay, Michael?
I think that there might be more opportunities for LGBTQ youth to go and talk to someone or go and be able to talk about their feelings, but they either might not know about it or they don't feel comfortable going to talk to them, like Heather was saying. And so, I don't know. I think there are lots of great opportunities. I just don't know the reasons that people aren't taking them more, because there are so many great ones out there. Like you were mentioning, the interventionists, and they even have a higher level of confidentiality than school counselors, so you can basically talk to them about anything. And so I don't know why people aren't talking to them, because instead they're just internalizing their pain, and that could either end up to self-harm or even worse. So.
Okay. Jenny?
I think on this panel, we have a wonderful representative of an open parent and a comfortable, confident, amazing, open student. And what I find in my work is that there is a lot of fear or internalized homophobia that they're dealing with, but also my whole world is going to change. Believe it or not, in this day and age, people still have that perspective. I have one transgender male who is Latin American, and he is dealing with a cultural difficulty of, this is not okay in my culture, and this will not be accepted. In fact, he's had to lie to his family and say, I'm gay, when he's not gay, he's transgender. So I think that there are many fears that people that aren't as accepting or haven't been in such a supportive environment as it sounds like you've had, Michael, that we're just not aware of, that they know. So I tried to get this particular young man connected with some services down in Denver, thinking if it was out of his community, he'd feel a little bit more comfortable. But even then, he has to figure out where to tell his mom that he's going during that time. So I think the cultural and the family piece is much bigger than we realize. And luckily, times are changing. Parents are better educated. Teachers are better educated. We live in a good part of the country as far as that goes, but it's still very prevalent. Yeah.
So I think that leads to the next natural question is family. Jean alluded to this and about having that conversation with your parents. I mean, it seems to me that also occurs at a time in your life where having conversations about personal things with your parents is difficult anyway. I say that because I have a teenager now. And it's tricky sometimes navigating just conversations about, like, did you do your homework? And, oh, you're picking on me. But something big, to me, this is big because it's part of your identity. Anything that impacts your identity, to me, is big. How do you broach those conversations with your parents? And as a parent, how do you respond in a way that reaffirms that you still accept and love your child for who they are as they are? So I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that. And I'm going to start with Jean.
Oh, okay. Well, one of the most helpful persons that I've met recently is in the work of Caitlin Ryan, who's at San Francisco State, and she has a website, familyacceptanceproject.com.org, whichever one. And what she's done in her research is to discover that parents' behavior is really critical to how it impacts the at-risk behavior of the children. So she has a whole list of negative behaviors, and some of those I'm sure parents do not realizing that they're negative. And then she has a list of accepting behaviors. And there's a whole training that PFLAG's prepared to do with being able to meet with some parents and saying, okay, here, this is what you can do to help your child. And I met with two parents a father and a mother, two parents, who are struggling themselves. And they said, we're really open, except now it's our child. And what they said, which was the right thing, right off the bat was, we love you no matter what. But the internalization, and it's a cultural thing, this is also of a different culture, and the work that the parents have to do before they can come out. There's a whole parallel journey for parents, but usually their kids have been on the journey longer, and they may still be struggling, and so it's hard for them to talk. And then the parents learn about it, and then they have to deal with their stuff, and it's difficult for the conversation to happen. There are some parents that will just right out say to their child, so are you gay? Or something, pretty out there. And then they kind of force the child to have the conversation. In our case, our son is a very private person, and I didn't feel I had the right to force him to talk about it. And we waited, and we waited. And he had to go through whatever he had to go through on his own until he was ready to share it with us. So those are just two different approaches. And interestingly enough, Jenny, you can relate to this, I'm sure, that he knew we would be accepting. That didn't matter because he didn't want to disappoint us. It was all his own internal work that he had to get through before he was even comfortable enough to be able to say it, or he couldn't hold on to it any longer, is what I think it was. So that kind of work with parents is critical. And PFLAG also has a brochure about, it's meant for LGBTIQ people to say, here's some ideas about coming out. And I think in Oasis they must talk about that too, and I'm let Heather talk about that. But there really are strategies that the youth need, and there are strategies that the parents need, and sometimes neither knows enough to be able to have that successfully, implemented.
So Heather, do you want to talk about how Oasis supports that process, as Jean mentioned?
Yeah. So that's typically one of the big things for youth that come to Oasis. A lot of them aren't out to their parents yet. So we're often going through the process of, I think I want to come out, I'm not sure, how should I do it? And the big thing that we tell them all is, this is each person's own personal journey. But we do go through and spend some time around talking about, well, what do you think, how do you think it might go? What do you think might be said? Well, what makes you think that? Have you heard your parents say positive things about LGBTQ people? Have you heard them say negative things? We talk about strategies of kind of dropping hints, like, hey, did you see that news story on same-sex marriage? What do you think about that? Just different ways to maybe fill out their situation. But the biggest thing is just, what are your other supports at this time? So you're planning on coming out next Tuesday. All right, so what's that going to look like? Who can you rely on if it doesn't go well? Do you have a safe family member that you can talk to, like an aunt or an uncle or someone? Are you connected with your interventionist? Sometimes we even practice, like, what would you say? We'll say it to us. How did that feel? We talk about what medium they're going to use. Some of them would rather write down what they're going to say. We do encourage them to give their parents time. That's always my big thing, is that, you've had, say, 5 years, 1 year, 6 months to think about this, to plan this, to talk about this, to know this, and your parents are just finding out in that moment. So you can't expect them to be over here with you, at that very moment. They'll get there. They love you. But that's a big piece of what we talk about with the youth. I know when I came out, I wanted my parents right away to be like, all right, you get it, you're good, let's go. And it wasn't until interning with Metro DC PFLAG and sitting in these PFLAG meetings as a 20-something saying, like, wow, my parents had to come out? Like, I never thought about it from their perspective. I never sat there and said, like, oh, my mom's going to have to come out to her coworkers. So just letting youth know that your parents will also have their journey and respecting that. And so far, the youth who've come out, it's gone well for them.
Good.
I can give a plug to a wonderful film that people could get if they are in this process themselves and maybe having their own struggles, because it is it's an interview process. The film is called Anyone and Everyone, and it was made by Jared Polis's mother, I can say, because we know Jared. But Susan Polis Schutz made the film a couple of years ago, and I think you can just go to the website and order a copy. We did a premiere at the Boulder Public Library a couple of years ago, and what was so wonderful about it is that she went all over the country finding various nationalities, various religions, various race, and looking at these families, the parents in particular, and what they had to go through, coming from wherever. And it's very honest, and sometimes their kids were a part of it, and they said, yeah, I just said, like Heather said, I said, okay, this is what she said, I was really mean to my mother. And this was an Asian mother who really had a hard time with this, but this daughter wasn't sensitive to that, and she just expected her mother to shape up, and the mother was freaking out, And it's really helpful for parents to realize, oh, okay, if I did freak out, it's not the end of the world. I mean, it is part of the journey that I have to make, and I love being able to help people see that this is a journey that you can move through the shock, through the grief, through the anger, through the blame, all of that to a place of acceptance, because I truly believe that.
Jenny, do you want to add?
I think that Jean and Heather both did an excellent job. I would add to what Heather said of maybe having students role play a little bit with someone that they trust, practice these conversations and what they might say to their parents. And for the parents, what I really encourage them to do is to be curious and to ask questions. So if they're having trouble with their own reactions, a lot of times parents, when they're afraid, tend to talk a lot and share their own experience and want to be heard because they want to protect their children. And what I always say is 2 sentences or less, either make a statement that's supportive or ask a question and be curious. And also to get their own support, which is great for the resources that we have here in Boulder, but to get their own support, have people that they can talk to so that they're not playing their process out and projecting what they feel. That's a very therapist word, I know, but projecting what they feel onto their child who is going through their own struggles so that they can keep the parent role and be supportive and find different ways of approaching their child, so that the connection is the biggest thing, to not isolate yourselves. If you are the child from your parent or your parent from your child, recognizing that each of you love each other and you're trying to work this out together. So to stay connected while you're doing all of this.
Good advice.
Michael, what would you like to add as far as this conversation regarding parents?
I don't know. Personally, my parents were very, very accepting. I came out to them mid 8th grade year, so like 2 years ago. And so I was really worried about it, but it was a really irrational fear, and I have many of them, but like lots of them were like, oh my God, they're gonna hate me, they're gonna disown me, they're gonna kick me out of my house. And of course I was like, nothing like that was ever gonna, it was even possible of happening. Because I never really heard them talk about gay people. I know they had lesbian friends, but like, I don't know, like it wasn't really a topic that was discussed all that often in my house, or at least I didn't understand it enough to realize that it was being talked about. When I told them, no one was really that surprised. So, I mean, most of them knew since I was a very young child. So they've been preparing for longer than I have for me coming out. So they personally were fine with it. They were perfect. So yeah, I don't know if I have anything to say about what you should do if you haven't come out to your parents. Just, think through every step, because I think that's very key.
Okay. So Jenny, I noticed that when Michael said that his parents already knew when he told them, I saw you smile. Mm-hmm. And that was actually something that I was wondering, because to me it seems like if you're an involved parent, or that in some ways you may not acknowledge that but that you probably do know. Mm-hmm. Did that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, and I think it's like Jean said, she's a very involved parent and very open, and she had a sense but because of how her son chose to deal with his inner turmoil or his inner process, he needed a while to be able to openly discuss it. So parents do have a sense, and I think, again, coming back to that curiosity versus your fear of, I think a lot of parents want to protect their children, and they fear the worst. Even in this day and age, they still fear, what will this mean for my child in terms of being bullied or discriminated against? And so for kids to remember that their parents are usually afraid for them in some way, and for parents to remember when you have that gut instinct and you think something, this goes with anything, but especially in this area of wondering about your child's sexual orientation or gender identification, educating yourself, asking others for feedback of what they're noticing with your child, and then establishing that safe place of, we can talk about anything, but I think then demonstrating it, because a lot of parents will say, I'm open to whatever, and then they aren't able to demonstrate it with their actions. They close down quickly, or again, they lecture instead of listening. So the biggest thing for parents to remember with teens is to stay connected in terms of activity. So go out and do things together, not where you're trying to force an agenda or talk about something, but, I'm just wondering, there's some things that I notice might be a little confusing for you, or some things that I've kind of noticed. How do you feel about, I've noticed that, your manner of dress is pretty cool, but let's say, for example, your child is seeming to be gender variant and is dressing more like a boy when she's a female. Just asking some curious questions without making any statements or pushing an agenda, if that makes sense. I don't know if that's clear.
That's wise.
I've had conversations with a colleague of mine, that the whole idea of that we have sort of like this gender box that we like to put people in, and when people don't fit within that gender box, it challenges us on how we interact with that person, or how we react to that person. And so I'm wondering if maybe you might be able to share, each of you, some advice in terms of accepting behaviors or really things to not do. Because when Jean was talking, it reminded me of a book that I had read recently about 35 dumb things well-intentioned people say. And there's some comments in there that people have made to their gay and lesbian friends that they may not have meant anything by it, but it did really insult the person that they were talking to. And so that's why I was thinking that, sometimes the style of dress, sometimes the way people act doesn't fit within somebody else's expectations of what they should be within that gender box. And so I'm wondering if maybe each of you could talk about ways in which people, not only parents or teachers, but anybody, can be supportive of their friend, family member, or whatever that looks like. Heather?
Yeah, I think I do want to just start off by saying, just because someone is displaying their gender in a different way, right? I think we need to be careful that we're not pushing them to say, like, are you gay? Is that what that means, right? Because gender is so fluid, and our expression of gender, whether we're man or woman, masculine, feminine, is all over the place. Like, I tend to play with masculine and feminine looks all the time, depending on the day, right? So I think we just need to allow, especially for our kids, like they're just sort of learning, like, who am I? How do I want to be seen in the world? How do I want to put myself out there? And a lot of that can be playing with like hairstyle or dress or style of dress. So I think, to be accepting, we just, we need to allow that. We need to allow, if our 5-year-old wants to wear a princess dress for Halloween, okay, like that is perfectly acceptable. And I think sometimes we get scared and we think like, oh, does this mean my child's transgender? Is my son gay? When really this is just a child exploring healthily their gender and what that means and how they want to be seen in the world. So I think just supporting that in every way that we can is a big deal.
Okay. Jean?
Well, I'm thinking of the Family Acceptance Project. I wish I'd brought the list of things because they're really pretty good, and I don't know if I can remember very many. One of the negative things that struck me, because I can't imagine a parent doing this, is saying, well, we're going to church, but you shouldn't really sit with the family. You should sit somewhere else. That was so blatant to me. about rejecting behavior that I just couldn't stand it. But I think that the opposite side of that is that even if your child may be palling around with a crowd, that you have some feelings like this, oh dear, what's happening, and you're starting to get scared as a parent. I think learning to be accepting of your children's friends and inviting them over, even if they might be gay, or, and then you get into some of the issues that some parents worry about, which is, what about sleepovers? And they worry about that. And thank goodness I didn't have that to worry about, so I don't have any big advice about that, as in same-sex, attraction and that kind of sleepover. So that's something, though, I think you just have to talk about and just be honest about discussing this really, I'm just not comfortable with this. And so the child can know that there still are boundaries, and that the parents have the right to create whatever the boundaries are that they need. But by the same token, I think the parents have to be as accepting as they're able to be, and be honest about, well, okay, we're not going to tell Grandma, not now, but time will come when we will be able to do that. And that's just where I am now, they would say. Because I've heard a lot of parents say that. It scares them to talk about the other family members. But, it's not like you have to rush into doing everything all at the same time. Mm-hmm. All of this is a process. And so I think learning how to be honest enough about where you are. And another thing that parents do is they tend to feel guilty and blame themselves. Like, what did I do wrong? And usually you didn't do anything wrong. Usually it's something that is inherent in the child, and you're not in control of that. And so learning how to make peace with that and letting go of the control piece, that's a big lesson for parents.
Well, it seems to me that if your child comes up to you and have this conversation with you, that you did a lot of things right as a parent.
Yeah, yeah.
So, Michael, in terms of accepting behaviors, do you have any recommendations?
I mean, I think even if you tell someone that, I don't know, that you're gay, and even if they're not very supporting at the beginning, like, give them time. I think we almost have to take that upon ourselves to give them time to think it over, because we basically just dropped a bombshell on them if they didn't know. But I don't know, for me personally, the best kind of acceptance and the best kind of support that I can have is, like, the quiet assurance that they're there for me. Because, like, personally, I love to, like, or not love, but it happens, where I just, like, I mull things over for weeks or months. Like, I have to think about it so much, but all of my friends and family, like, they're there for me no matter what, and I can rely on them no matter what, but they're not necessarily directly supporting me no matter what I'm doing. So it's almost like they're in the background, they're not in my face, and I don't know. I think that's the best for me, but it varies person to person. And so I don't know, I think one thing is, like, parents, like, freak out if their children are, like, just, like, almost, like, secluding into themselves for a little bit, or, like, not being around other people and really just being by themselves for a long time. Like, I do that a lot. My parents are like, why aren't you with people? And it's like, because I like to think by myself. I like to really think about what's happening before I talk to other people. And so I think it's the parents' jobs to not worry about their kids being alone or thinking or figuring things out by themselves, I think, because that's a huge step. You don't need to be there every step of the way. You just need to be able to be there every step of the way.
Okay. Jenny?
I like what Heather said about, encouraging acceptance around all kinds of explorations, and to add what Michael, to what you were saying too, is I think if parents and kids can develop I've noticed parents do better if there's, like, a safe system, where someone can say, well, we've talked about this, I need a couple of weeks, I will let you know, or I will let Uncle Mike know, or, we have a safe person or a safe system that they can kind of rely on as a way of saying, this is just me, this is my time, because it is very worrisome from a parent's perspective when your child isn't able to communicate for a period of time. They want to make sure, especially with everything going on the news and the media right now, with all of the things that are happening in schools and where kids are not feeling safe, if your child is going inward, parents do want to know what's going on. So developing a safe system and an accepting environment where, you encourage different trends, you encourage different ways of exploration and different peer groups, getting to know your kids' friends, but not as a way of, a lot of parents do that, I must know who this is and I must meet them and I must meet their parents, which the kids hear, you're just trying to control me. So I would encourage, again, that curiosity of saying, well, I'd really like to get to know so-and-so. It seems like you're pretty close, and being more, having a dialogue and having questions.
So speaking of curiosity, we have a question from a viewer. And the question is, if straight people want to understand transgender issues better, how does one appropriately ask those questions? So I'm going to start with Jenny again.
So that is a tricky territory. That is a tricky territory. Genderspectrum.org is a wonderful website that people can go to, and they have a book that's associated with that website. And that's the first resource that I usually send people to try to understand. Because I know all of us, even myself, someone who cares very deeply and works in this field, I know that I always am thinking about the right way to say something, or hoping it comes out the right way, not knowing firsthand what some of my clients are going through. So reading, talking to people, I think people like Heather and Michael that are very open and very willing to share their experience and educate others, and realizing that you may make mistakes, but that if your intention is good, keep trying to learn and keep asking questions.
I would like to add a film that we made 2 years ago in PFLAG. It's called Faces and Facets of Transgender Experience. And the reason we made the film was just exactly what the listener is asking for, is how can you help people who just don't have any experience or understand, and there are so many stereotypes about what it means to be transgender. And the film we made is 23 minutes long, and it's interviews with about 18, a spectrum of people of different ages, of different gender, and it includes families with young children, and it includes, I think the oldest person is, I don't know, somewhere in the 60s, and went through Stonewall and came out then, and the differences historically in looking at their lives and how they've handled it. But it all comes down, in this film, to the joy of authenticity. And that's such an important lesson for straight people to get. And it's being used all over the country. I just had a email from someone who is transitioning on the job, and his employer, this was in Idaho, and his employer somehow learned about this film and showed it to all 120 employees. And the letter was from the person herself, who said, I can't tell you how wonderful it was to have people know that they could see this, so then we could talk about it. And if they wanted to ask their questions, but they didn't see me as some far out, weird person, and that I was so strange because they had gotten acquainted with this array of others. And so maybe I should tell people, if they go to www.pflagboulder.org, they can order a copy and get it for use. It's being used in the Boulder Valley schools, as well as in college classes, and just a variety of places. It's very exciting.
Okay. Heather, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I think the big thing. Sorry. I think the big part is really. Sorry. is really being respectful and thinking about, why am I asking this question of this transgender person? Is this necessary information? I know from some of my trans friends, you have no right to know anything about, are they physically transitioning? What body parts do they have, right? Things of that nature are really none of our business. People walk through the world in many different ways, and so the biggest thing is respecting their pronouns, respecting how they're identifying, even if that's changing on a daily basis. But I think going online, like Jenny said, and watching videos and just sort of hearing other people's experiences might be a great way to start, because you don't just want to walk up to someone who's trans and say, tell me what this is all about. What is this like, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have just a few minutes left, And one of the things that I would like to have somebody talk about is the upcoming Safe Schools Youth Leadership Institute that is sponsored by the Boulder Valley School District. So, anybody?
Well, maybe I could say just in background that through the Equity Office, these were established and supported by the Boulder Valley School District. And they've been having youth leadership institutes for various ethnic groups, and they've been done separately for, I'm guessing, at least 8 years or longer. And so there is one that is for safe schools, and it's for allies and LGBTQI, all of those folks who want to come. They're students from all over the district who come. And Heather can tell you more about it this year.
Yes, Boulder Valley Safe Schools Coalition has been somewhat involved in coordinating the types of activities that might happen, but it's going to be hosted at CU, I believe, on January 29th. And it's sort of an all-day long, workshop conference type setting, and it's a great opportunity for students who maybe are involved in their gay straight alliances or who aren't, to come together. And I know this year we've been talking a lot about expressing sort of our connection to the LGBTQ community, or expressing our identities through different mediums, so art, poetry, writing, different ways to sort of express ourselves. And I know that there's talk around incorporating a social justice piece. So I know Lisa Check is organizing that and probably has much more to say on it. But the Safe Schools Coalition, and as well as students in the schools, are having a lot of input on how that day is going to look.
Okay. Do you want to add anything, Michael?
I think I went last year. I didn't know what it was all that much last year, but I did go with a few other members of our GSA. And I don't know, it was amazing just to see all the groups that were there. And regrettably, I was only able to stay there for half a day, but I think it definitely made an impact, even for the short time that I was there. I'm really looking forward to this year's. I think I'm going to, Lisa just actually contacted me about helping to, put, input. So, yeah.
Well, sometimes it's been such a wonderful thing for them just to get together and be with other kids that are like them, and to have the majority, in that particular group together and meeting each other from other schools. It's just been wonderful. But I think this year we're hoping that that whatever they plan will include an action piece. That what are they going to do when they go back to their school that's going to make a difference in their school. And at least I hope that's what Lisa's planning. We'll find out.
Yeah, great. So it's about time for us to wrap up. I would like to thank each of our panelists, Jenny Kay, Michael Clymer, Jean Hodges, and Heather Crate, for joining us this evening to discuss the challenges facing LGBTIQ youth. Before we sign off, I'd also like to remind people of the upcoming presentations on Thursday, December 20th from 7 to 8 p.m., Strengthening Reading and Confidence Skills at the Louisville Library. Monday, January 14th, on Stress Reduction at the Meadows Branch Library. Thursday, January 24th, Understanding Teen Depression at the Louisville Library. And January 28th, back here in the Boulder Valley School District Ed Center, on Race to Somewhere, which highlights the things that we're doing right in our school system. I would like to thank BVS, the Boulder Valley School District, and Channel 22 for hosting this show. And I'd like to thank all of you who tuned in this evening. And have a good evening.
Hey, I'm making my own way. And now the planet starts bowing down. And soon the growth returns to follow ground. But I know what's churning underneath the snow. And I love my baby, and we've miles to go. Hey, 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 I'm okay. Be with me. a while winter time.